Hi, I'm Dave Gardy from Maritime TV from our studios near Washington, D.C. for the 6th Ballast Water Treatment Report with Steve Candito, CEO of Ecochlor, coming to us via Skype from New York. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Dave. Good afternoon.
Yeah, today we'd like to discuss a little bit about what a ship owner has to do when issuing an RFQ for a ballast water treatment system. What are some of the considerations? How do you make sure you're comparing apples to apples, that type of thing, and RFQ language that'll make sure you can do that. Can you give us some perspective on that?
Yes, absolutely. And you really hit on the key point to start. I mean, there are several different types of ballast water treatment systems out there, broad categories of ultraviolet light systems, electrochlorination systems, and then sort of chemical injection systems. And so if you put out a very broad RFQ with those different types of manufacturers, you may get some very different proposals back that are going to be hard to compare. So there are some specifics that you should be asking when you send out that request for quote so that you make sure that those different systems are properly compared.
What are those things?
Well, so I've got sort of a list of 10 or 11 that I think ship owners should keep in mind. So the first one is really the number of filters that you're going to have on board. Very often a manufacturer will quote one filter. And that's usually adequate, but most ships have two ballast pumps, and really the way to have some redundancy and make sure you've got the best operational efficiency is to have two filters. So you should make that clear that someone's not quoting enough capacity, but only in one filter. So that's a good example. Another thing to also think about is the operating expenses. They can be very different in the different types of systems. So very often in the chemical injection system, it's obvious that you have chemical costs, but sometimes owners don't realize that in a UV system, you've got increased power costs, so you have to compare that. In an electrochlorination system, there's power issues, there's electrode issues. Same thing with the UV systems. You've got the lamps that they use are expendable or can, the useful life of that is important, so you got to keep all that in mind from an operating cost perspective. After that, it really gets into more of maybe commercial terms that the owner should be looking at. So obviously, if an owner is looking for his entire fleet versus one vessel, most manufacturers can offer a better price. If you're doing multiple units at the same time, there's some volume discounts and cost efficiencies there. Warranty terms, of course, are very important. Those should be spelled out well. There are different warranties, within the industry. Of course, you want to make sure that you've got both a U.S. Coast Guard and an IMO approval, as well as classification society approvals. Some owners have one or the other, but not both. So you probably want to look at that to make sure you're comparing apples to apples. Something that hasn't been an issue in the past, but I think will be an issue going into next year is delivery dates. Right now, I think most manufacturers can meet reasonable delivery requirements, but next year, the demand is going to pick up, and it may not be so easy to meet delivery dates. So that's a key part in your RFQ. Spare parts is another one that everyone knows. Shipboard ships carry spare parts for various pieces of equipment, so that's something to keep in mind. Install supervision is also an important one. Some owners will do it, some owners won't, and whether it's included in the price or not is important. And then finally, training. The crew is going to need training on how to operate that system. So how that training is going to be conducted, either on board or computer assisted, and how that's paid for should all be part of a good request for quote.
Now, if a ship owner is trying to figure out how much time he should allot for this to create the RFQ, how long would it normally take? And should there be a response questions where you have like a deadline, like a government proposal, where if you have questions, you have to have them in by a certain time, and then allow the bidders to do that? Is that advisable?
Yeah, I think that's probably a reasonable thing to do. I wouldn't get so strict as some of these municipal or government contractors do. Sometimes once you've got those bids in, it's perfectly reasonable to go back and negotiate with your preferred vendor. It doesn't mean that quote has got to come exactly like that. So I would encourage negotiation after the fact, but certainly leaving yourself, I would say, at least a month or 6 weeks for this process to go on. Allow the vendors to ask some questions, share those questions with all the vendors that are quoting. But then, yeah, once you get those quotes in, if you've got a preferred vendor, there's nothing stopping you from going back and talking to them and negotiating with them, unlike a a government proposal where you just kind of have to pick the lowest bidder.
Excellent. Well, we appreciate the perspective on what you have to include in an RFQ for a ballast water treatment system. And I think it's going to be very interesting for ship owners to hear this ballast water treatment report number 6. We've been talking to Steve Candito, who is the CEO of Ecochlor. Thanks for joining us, Steve, from New York.
Thank you, Dave.
I'm Dave Gardy here from Maritime TV studios near Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.